10 signs that your leadership style is ineffective. That's what we're talking about in today's video. Let's get it in. What's up, folks? Brandon Shines here with Saduri International, and today we are talking about 10 signs that your leadership style is ineffective. If you are a leader, you want to make sure that you pay particularly close to what I'm going to be talking about here so you can mitigate the weaknesses and the challenges that you have by understanding what people might not be telling you. If you are an inspiring leader, then also pay particular attention because you can mitigate and reduce some of the tension that you're going to have when you step into this leadership seat by adhering to some of these things that we'll be talking about today. So, as a leader, our main job is to be effective. We are supposed to be influencing people. We are supposed to be influencing, when I say influencing people, people within the whole 360 opportunity. People above us, our superiors, people below us, our subordinates, and the people that we have, our colleagues and peers who are alongside of us. So that whole 360 operation. It is incumbent upon us to stand firm as a strong leader and present ourselves as such. And I say it like this: if you are not serious about your leadership, then just move out of that leadership seat. Let someone else who has the tenacity, someone else who has the drive, someone else who has the aspirations to sit in that seat and do a better job, hopefully, than you are, right? So let's get down to what we are talking about. But before I do that, let me share with you what we do here at Saduri International. This is important because this will set the stage for what we'll be talking about. So what do we do here? Well, we equip leaders with the practical frameworks that align people, processes, and systems. These are the levers that we're pulling and pushing to make sure everything is aligned and balanced, to create measurable improvements, to have measurable outcomes, and what we call PEP. Productivity, efficiency, and profitability. Ultimately, your job at your organization is to produce so that the organization can be profitable. You service clients, you sell a product or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, it's all about the black, us being in the black, not in the red. And that comes along with how we are as leaders. And that comes from the top down though too, in the culture of the organization. Well, today we're going to be very, very specific and talk about one certain opportunity of this PPS, the people. We have to make sure that the people are trained right. And people is probably the biggest, I would say not probably, it's low power. People are the biggest variant there because of all the varying degrees of information, knowledge, wisdom, insight, know-how that we come into the organization with, cultural backgrounds, other opportunities that we have in the professional, before we got to the professional seat that we are in right now. All these things culminates to a certain drive of a person, or lack thereof, right? So when we have that incumbent, that's something that we must think about. When we have that as a strong part of how we're supposed to facilitate, then we want to make sure that we do this in the right manner. So let's talk about what ineffective leadership looks like so that we also know what effective leadership looks like, okay? Because we want to be effective. Remember, productivity, efficiency, and profitability, at the end of the day, we want to increase that. So let's go ahead and dive into our conversation for today. All right, so let's get going. Here we go. So 10 signs your leadership style is ineffective. And you know exactly what I mean by ineffective. The numbers aren't there, the KPIs aren't being met, people are in chaos. You cannot subtract yourself out of the whole equation without things breaking down. That's not good leadership. That's a sign of horrible leadership. I'm just going to put it down the way it is supposed to be put: horrible leadership. And it's incumbent upon us leaders, to do better. It's incumbent upon us in order to make sure that we facilitate the right thought process going forward. Now let's go ahead and dive into some of these. All right, so first of all, a poll, Gallup poll, shows that there's a 70% engagement variance, and that's due to you as the leader. I'll say that again, 70% engagement variance, and that has everything to do, it is attributed to the leader or the manager of the department or the organization. Now, our whole opportunity, the framework that we're going to be working on and where we want to go, first of all, is the primary goal is to have commitment, not just compliance. We want commitment. We want people who are committed. We want people who have the right influence. We want people who have the right mindset. And we can do this effectively as a leader. We can get their commitment by being influential versus being more authoritarian and have them just comply even out of some sort of disdain or not wanting to. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing that we have here, if we go down, the core foundation. 3 things that we're going to be harping on here, making sure that the trust, accountability, and the growth are there. The trust, you got to have the trust as a leader. If you don't have the trust, you don't get buy-in, you don't have everything else, you'll have people that will follow you reluctantly. And that's not what we're supposed to have following us as leaders. So, accountability, owning up to the things that we have done. And understanding that there may be consequences. There are going to be consequences or the result, whether things came out positive or negative. One of my mentors told me one time, he said, Grandison, if you're successful, that's your fault. He also said, followed up with that statement, said, if you're not successful, that's your fault. So either way, there's a consequence, and either way, I am ultimately responsible for what I do, just like you are there at your organization. Accountability. And then finally, again, growth. And there's an equation that we'll talk about later, another conversation for another time, but having the right opportunity to pull the PPS levers correctly will facilitate growth. So we're going to be focusing on that right now. So let's start talking about what it looks like to be ineffective. Now we're going to take this in stages. First of all, we're going to talk about the communication and the emotional connection with people. Communication is the number one skill set that you should have mastered as a leader. I'll say that one more time. Communication is the number one skill set that you should have mastered as a leader. And there are varying degrees of communication techniques that we facilitate. Being assertive in your communication, understanding complete communication technique, understanding how to, these are all different frameworks, 15 C's, all different frameworks in order to facilitate communication as a strategy. That's how we see communication over here, as a strategy. So communication, emotional connection, even the emotional control that comes with that. Let's dive in. Here we go. Listening versus talking. There is a difference. And I want to say active listening versus talking. Yapping is just talking about frivolous things. Being very strategic again in our communication. So leadership starts with understanding before being understood. So listening is part of communication. It's a very, very strong part, active listening, in order to facilitate the right thought process. This is a sign, if you do more talking than you are doing listening, this is why your leadership is ineffective. Effective leaders understand that they also have to be quiet at times and listen, yes, even to our subordinates, listen to those who are subject to us, because they may have insight that we're not privy to. And it does happen, because we don't know everything. At least I know I don't. I can admit that. How about you? But if you don't know everything, sometimes it's better to listen, even to listen to all the peers, this whole 360, listen to all the people that are around you as well. So that's extremely important. Let's talk about point number 2. Point number 2 is avoiding difficult conversations. Leaders who are weak avoid difficult conversations. Let me say that one more time. Leaders who are weak and passive and milquetoast avoid having difficult conversations. You have to have difficult conversations. You have to be assertive enough to have the difficult conversations. And making sure that unaddressed problems eventually become organizational culture. It eventually becomes organizational culture, and you don't want that as organizational culture. That'll be horrible, making sure that you understand that the proper way to facilitate this is to sit them down and have the proper conversation, even if the conversation is extremely uncomfortable. That's our plight as leaders. Okay, let's continue on. Clarity of expectations. You have to be able to very much so specify your expectations in a clear and concise manner so that it's understood. And I would even say getting checkpoints and utilizing certain frameworks like the complete communication technique, answering who, what, why, where, when, how, to set expectations and making sure that people know those points that you're talking about. Answer the questions. Who? Who are you talking to? What are we talking about? When do you want it done? Why do we want it done? Right? Those types of things, those types of opportunities. How do you want it done? Understanding, answering those questions is going to really clarify the expectation. So confusion tends to be very, very expensive in an organization. Very expensive because it has a high cost of waste, which you can tie down to the dollar amount, but also clarity creates confidence. And we want to be confident. We want ourselves to be confident, and we also want to instill confidence in those who work with us as well. Continue on. Here we go. Feedback resistance. If you cannot accept feedback, this is why people don't want to expound and chat with you about something that could help you, and they'll just let you falter and let you fail. So leaders who stop learning eventually stop leading effectively. There was one point in time where a leader said, yeah, it seems like my subordinates are more intelligent than me and they know more than me. I said, well, have you stopped learning? And after asking some questions and answering some questions, found that he thought he knew more than he thought he knew. He stopped learning. I said, okay, you got to get back on they've got to get yourself back in the saddle. That's the short version. But you can't pretend that you know everything. One of my pet peeves is just people say, I know. It's like, if you know why you're asking me, right? That kind of thing. So leaders, be mindful, be careful, be cognizant of how we're presenting ourselves with feedback resistance. If we have feedback resistance, that creates ineffective leadership. All right, here we go. Neglecting emotional intelligence. Now, this word, this phrase, emotional intelligence, has been thrown around quite a bit, and I believe it has its place. Let me put it that way. It has its place, a very, very strong place, as a matter of fact, in understanding how people can control their emotions and also being able to influence, not necessarily control, but influence the emotions of others by what you say, what you do to people that will also have varying degrees of emotional, and it's up to them to have the emotional control, but you can definitely influence that. So here, people remember how you made them feel over what you said. Remember that. And this is where understanding, if I say something, I can evoke some emotion with you. I may push some of your buttons of your pet peeves, and next you know, you're crashing out, going 0 to 100 really quick, right? And so having the opportunity to have emotional control, us knowing our pet peeves, us knowing our triggers, us knowing our own hot buttons, that self-awareness is really going to help you long-term as a leader, because you're going to have people push your buttons. Sorry, there's no way around it. When you sit in the seat, that's par for the course. It will happen. It's up to us to be mindful that emotional control and having the emotional intelligence to understand where we are so we can facilitate the proper thought process going forward. Taking emotion out of the conversation many, many, many times, right? Let's go to the next one. Now we're going to talk about empowerment and growth strategy. This is where the rubber meets the road, because remember we had the conversation about PPS, and these are certain levers that we have opportunity to pull. And so if we had the people from lever 1 through 10 as far as the levels, and second lever of processes 1 through 10 and systems 1 through 10, we may have to have a 10 over here, or a 2 over here, and a 5 over here. And again, these levers have to be so much switched, and have to be varied, and has to be weighted regarding the subject matter and or whatever the information is. And that's how we continue to improve, by being very, very flexible and adaptable in these types of situations. So influence over authority. We want to have influence over authority. We get the authority by having the position. The position has a name. COO or CEO or EVP or VP, whatever it is. That gives you the authority by title, but now we're talking about the influence. Take the title out, and are you influential with people, right? Titles secure compliance, but influence inspires true commitment. Remember, we want the commitment. We don't want compliance, we want commitment. So we have to be real about what we are talking about, but again, we want influence. And there's a whole different conversation, just influencing as well. Do research on influence skills, and or watch some information videos on our channel about influence. This is a key opportunity for expounding on what you know about influence. Not just, again, not coercion, not manipulation, but influence. Empowerment over micromanagement. Okay, so great leaders build capable people, not dependency. Here's what I instruct, and I give this thought process to our coachees, doesn't matter, CEO all the way down to emerging leader. Subordinates, teach your subordinates how to come to you with solutions versus problems. What does that look like? Well, that's having a conversation with them and saying, hey, when you have an issue, and this is something you may have to say more than once, when you have an issue, come to me with at least 3 solutions. Solution A, B, C. Now, you may be able to fire off the solution just like that, but that is not the key. What you are doing when you do that is that you're taking away their ability to learn. You're taking away their ability to become a better problem solver. You're taking away their ability of utilizing their creativity, the 5 parts of the authentic self, the imagination, mind, will, imagination, emotions, and intellect. You're not helping them by creating the dependency on you. And people do this all the time, and there are some human nature things I'll talk to you about if you ever get in the program that we want to be very, very mindful of about who's the bigger culprit in doing this. Understanding that, again, we don't want to create a dependency. You should be able to take yourself out of the equation, go on vacation, not have your phone ringing off of the hook or text going off every 10 minutes with problems. If you create the opportunity for them to learn, you'll have a dependency. Should be an interdependency, but not a codependency or a dependency, okay? So making sure we have that thought process right. I don't want to go on it too much, but there's a whole lot that we can say there. Here, we're talking about sustainable results through people. Understanding that sustainable performance comes from developing people, not just tracking results. Developing people. You do have to develop your people. Some people need the soft skills training, which is very, very apropos for any position, but also there's the technical training or the hard skills training for that position as well. Understanding how to utilize systems properly, and then again, people come in varying degrees of how to utilize technology, but we want sustainable performance. Sustainable performance. How do we create sustainable performance? Understanding the frameworks of how they are working, but also understanding that there are numbers, KPIs that you should be going toward, that your subordinates should be going toward, you as well as a leader, manager, and making sure that we adhere to those KPIs. This is what we are supposed to be facilitating. This will help us have that sustained performance. And if everyone's trained up and everyone's coached up, then you'll have a result of that. And there's 30, 60, 90s, everything else that come about with that in order to have that process go down the right way. But this is a journey. This is not a quick fix. So if you have some sort of malicious opportunity for, I should say, not sustaining or non-sustainability, then you really have to get on track, because that will break down your whole entire leadership performance opportunities for you to really shine. So we'll talk about that later on. So a whole other conversation. I won't put the cart before the horse, but I really want you to focus on these 10 sides that present for ineffective leadership. Next one, consistent accountability. If you don't have consistent accountability, you will fall short in terms of how you manage, not just how you manage, but how people take ownership of their own issues. You have to have some sort of consistent accountability. We talk about data-driven accountability. Again, another conversation, another framework for another time, but data-driven accountability. If you facilitate that, or when you facilitate that right, you can have everything put on track, the expectations, everything, and you'll see that people will adhere to an elevated level of mindset of how they go about doing their work, their job, their daily functions. So you have to weight that, though, making sure that inconsistent accountability destroys your credibility. And this is something you have to hold your team to as well. So if your accountability is inconsistent, guess what? Their accountability is going to be inconsistent. And then that becomes the culture of that particular department. And if it comes from the top down, then that's going to be permeated within the culture. There are many, many organizations that we have taken on as our client, and guess what? The accountability from on high was all whacked out. We did make sure we put them through an accountability program. Some don't have an accountability program, and they're ushered into it by our program, and some of them do, and it's all gone awry, and we have to get that back on track. Either way, we must make sure that we have consistent accountability. Final point that I want to make here is that developing future leaders. You have to train up future leaders. If you're not training up future leaders, if you're not putting somebody under your proverbial wing and you're teaching them, then you may actually stagnate your own promotion. Let me say that again. If you are not training up someone to replace you, may be stagnating your promotion. That's the fact. I have one client right now, we were just talking, and he said that he was presented with the leadership opportunity that he might take, and the person, his boss asked him, he said, this is the second time asking him. And I said, okay, so what are you thinking about? He said, well, he can't get promoted because he's up for promotion, but he can't get promoted until he finds somebody to replace him. And yeah, that's right. That's the way the organization should do it. So therefore you don't have this gaping hole in this department and then have to facilitate somebody else. Now there's a whole progression and succession there that needs to happen if he does ascend and now the peers become his subordinates, whole different conversation, but something you must be mindful of. But developing future leaders. Leadership is measured by the leaders you develop, not your followers. The leaders you develop, okay? You have to develop leaders. Take time to develop other leaders, and you get that mindset, or you give them that mindset of leadership, and you'll see that some of the issues and challenges will reduce because they'll take on that persona of being a leader, and they'll step up to the plate with the right mindset, and that is very, very, very good for the organization. Here is the graphic in totality, 10 signs. Make sure you can take a screenshot here, but also if you want to DM me, and I'll send you this graphic as well. All right. Thanks, folks. Talk to you later. Gratitude Shines, Saduri International signing out. All right. Bye.